Elena Cross didn't expect to be traded twice in one lifetime. The first time her father handed her to a stranger for 3 cows and a wagon. The second time she woke tied to a horse, surrounded by Apache warriors, offered up like livestock by the very man who swore to protect her. But when the tribe's stone-faced leader looked her over and said she could walk free or stay as his wife for 30 days, she realized something darker. Maybe being traded wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a woman in the Arizona territory. Maybe it was being wanted for nothing at all. If you want to see how a desperate widow survives a bargain she never asked for, stick around until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The desert didn't care if you lived or died. It just watched. Elena Cross learned that the hard way, face down in the sand with her wrists bound and her dress torn halfway to rags. The sun pressed against her shoulders like a branding iron, and every breath she took tasted like dust and blood. Her mouth was so dry her tongue felt like leather, and somewhere behind her men were arguing in a language she didn't understand. Not English, not Spanish, Apache. She'd heard stories about them her whole life. Stories meant to scare children into staying close to the wagon trains, into not wandering off when the adults weren't looking. Stories about raids and scalps, and women who disappeared into the desert and were never seen again. Elena had listened to those stories the way you listen to ghost tales around a campfire, half believing, half doubting, always glad it wasn't you. Now it was her. She tried to lift her head, but a boot pressed down between her shoulder blades and shoved her back into the dirt. The man standing over her said something sharp, and another voice answered, deeper, quieter, like stones grinding together. Elena couldn't see either of them. All she could see was sand and the edge of her own shadow stretching thin across the ground. Her husband had done this. Not directly. He hadn't tied her up himself or handed her over. But he'd made the choices that led here, one after another, until there was nowhere left to go but down. James Cross had been a gambler, a drinker, and a coward, and Elena had known all 3 things before she married him. She'd married him anyway because her father told her to, because she was 19 and didn't know she had a choice, because the alternative was staying in a falling-apart house in Missouri with a man who looked at her like she was a burden he couldn't wait to be rid of. So she'd said yes to James Cross. She'd climbed into a wagon beside him and rolled west with 100 other families, all of them chasing the same lie. That life would be better somewhere else. It wasn't. James lost their savings in a card game outside Fort Defiance. He traded their second horse for whiskey in Prescott. By the time they made it into Apache country, they were down to 1 wagon, 1 exhausted mule, and a marriage that had stopped pretending to be anything but a mistake. Then the wagon broke an axle, and James decided the smart thing to do was keep moving on foot, cutting south through land everyone with half a brain knew belonged to the tribes. Elena told him it was suicide. He told her to shut her mouth and walk. 3 days later, they ran into a hunting party. James tried to run. They shot him in the back before he made it 20 yards. Elena didn't run. She stood there with her hands up and her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib, and she watched her husband bleed out in the sand without saying a word. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, and when one of the warriors walked up and cut the canteen off James's belt, she didn't even flinch. Maybe that's why they didn't kill her, or maybe they just hadn't decided yet. The boot lifted off her back, and rough hands hauled her upright. Elena's legs buckled, but the man holding her didn't let her fall. He dragged her forward, past 2 other warriors standing near a cluster of horses, and shoved her down onto her knees in front of someone new. This one was different. He stood taller than the others, lean and hard-edged, with black hair tied back, and a face that looked like it had been carved out of rock and left in the sun to bake. He wasn't old, maybe 30, maybe less, but there was something in the way he held himself that made him seem ancient. His eyes were dark and unreadable, and when he looked at Elena, it wasn't the way James used to look at her, like she was a thing he owned. It wasn't the way her father had looked at her either, like she was a problem he needed to solve. It was worse. He looked at her like she was nothing, like she didn't matter enough to hate. He said something in Apache, and the man who'd been holding her answered. The tall one, Elena decided he had to be the leader, or close to it, tilted his head slightly, studying her the way you'd study a horse you weren't sure was worth keeping. Then he crouched down, slow and deliberate, until his eyes were level with hers. "You speak English?" he asked. His voice was quiet, controlled. It didn't match the way her heart was trying to claw its way out of her chest. Elena swallowed. Her throat clicked. Yes, your man is dead. I know. You have no horse, no water, no weapon. He paused. You will die here. It wasn't a threat. It was just a fact. Delivered the same way you'd say the sky is blue or the desert is hot. Elena didn't argue. What would be the point? You have two choices, the man continued. You walk or you stay. Stay where? With us. Elena blinked. For a second, she thought she'd misheard him. You want me to… What? Come with you? Be a prisoner? No. His expression didn't change. A wife. The word hit her like a fist to the stomach. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for the crack in his face that would tell her he was mocking her. But there was nothing. He just watched her, patient and still, like he had all the time in the world. You're joking, she said. I am not. You don't even know me. I do not need to. Elena's breath came shallow and fast. She didn't understand. None of this made sense. Why? Because you are here, he said simply, and you are alive. That is enough. For what? For one moon. He held up a hand, fingers spread. 30 days. You stay. You live as my wife. At the end, you choose stay or go. If you go, I will give you a horse and water and point you toward the nearest settlement. You will not be harmed. And if I stay, then you stay. Elena's mind spun. This had to be a trap. It had to be. Men didn't just offer women choices like this, not for free, not without wanting something. But when she looked at him, really looked, she didn't see cruelty. She didn't see lust or anger or any of the things she'd learned to recognize in James's face when he'd had too much to drink. She saw nothing, and somehow that was worse. What do you get out of this? She asked. A wife, he said. For one moon, maybe longer. And if I say no? He stood, brushing dust off his knee. Then you walk. Elena glanced past him, toward the empty expanse of desert, stretching in every direction. No shade, no water, no landmarks she recognized. If she walked, she'd be dead by sundown. If she stayed, she didn't know what staying meant, but it had to be better than dying alone in the sand. What's your name? She asked. He looked down at her. Tarek. Elena, I know. He turned and said something to the others in Apache. One of them laughed, sharp and mean, but Tarek silenced him with a look. Then he glanced back at Elena. You have until we reach camp to decide. That's it? That is it. He walked away. Elena stayed on her knees in the sand, wrists still bound, heart still racing. Around her the warriors moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons, tightening saddles, preparing to leave. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her. It was like she'd already been forgotten. She thought about James, bleeding out 20 yards from where she knelt. She thought about the farm in Missouri, about her father handing her over like a cow at auction, about every man who'd ever looked at her and seen something to use. She thought about the desert and the way it didn't care if you lived or died. And then she thought about Tarek's face, blank and unreadable, and offering her something she'd never had before. A choice, even if it was a bad one. They rode for hours. Elena was thrown onto the back of a horse behind one of the younger warriors, her hands still tied, her body aching from the fall earlier. The man in front of her didn't say a word. None of them did. They just rode, following Tarek through the hills and dry creek beds, navigating terrain that all looked the same to Elena, but clearly meant something to them. She tried to keep track of where they were going, but after the first hour she gave up. The sun moved across the sky, brutal and relentless, and the only thing that kept her from passing out was the certainty that if she did, she'd fall off the horse and break her neck. By the time they stopped, the light was starting to fade. The group dismounted near a cluster of rocks that provided some shade, and Elena was hauled down and deposited on the ground like a sack of flour. Her legs were numb. Her wrists were raw from the rope. She sat there, dizzy and nauseous, while the men built a small fire and spoke in low voices. Tarek approached her after a few minutes, carrying a canteen. He crouched down and held it out. Elena stared at it. Why? You need water. I thought I had to decide first. You do. He pushed the canteen closer. But if you die before we reach camp, the choice is meaningless. She took it. Her hand shook as she unscrewed the cap and drank, and the water tasted like rust and dust and the best thing she'd ever swallowed in her life. She forced herself to stop after a few gulps, even though she wanted to drain the whole thing. Tarek watched her. You are stronger than you look. I'm not strong, Elena said. I'm just stubborn. Same thing. He took the canteen back and stood, but before he could walk away, Elena spoke again. What happens if I say yes? Tarek paused. You live with my people. You learn our ways. You share my fire. And your bed? His expression didn't flicker. Only if you choose. Elena frowned. You said I'd be your wife. For 1 moon. That does not mean I will force you. He met her eyes, steady and cold. I do not take what is not given. She didn't know if she believed him, but she also didn't have a better option. What happens after the moon? She asked. You choose again, stay or go. And if I stay? Then you are no longer a guest. You are one of us. Just like that? No. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Not just like that. But it is possible. Elena looked down at her bound wrists, at the dirt caked under her nails, at the torn hem of her dress. She thought about the farm again, about her father's face when he'd told her she was lucky James wanted her at all. She thought about the wagon, the broken axle, James running and dying and leaving her behind without a second thought. She thought about the desert, and then she looked up at Tarek and said, I'll stay. He nodded once, like he'd expected it, like it didn't matter either way. Good. He pulled a knife from his belt, and Elena flinched, but all he did was cut the rope around her wrists. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. She rubbed at the raw skin, hissing through her teeth, and Tarek watched her for another moment before turning away. Rest, he said. We leave at first light. Where are we going? Home. The camp was smaller than Elena expected. She'd imagined something out of the stories. Dozens of lodges, hundreds of people, fires burning everywhere. But this was just a cluster of low shelters tucked into a canyon, hidden from sight unless you knew where to look. Maybe 30 people, total. Mostly women and children, a handful of older men, and the warriors who'd brought her in. They arrived just after dawn, and the reaction to Elena's presence was immediate. The women stopped what they were doing and stared. The children whispered and pointed. One of the older men said something sharp to Tarek, and Tarek answered in a tone that left no room for argument. Elena stood in the center of it all, filthy and exhausted and acutely aware that she didn't belong. Tarek gestured for her to follow him, and she did, past curious eyes and muttered conversations she couldn't understand. He led her to a shelter near the edge of the camp, small, simple, made of hide and wood, and pushed the flap aside. This is yours, he said. Elena blinked. Mine? For now. I thought I was supposed to be your wife. You are. He stepped inside and she followed. The space was dim and cool, with a fire pit in the center and a few woven mats on the ground. But you will sleep here. I will sleep there. He pointed to a spot on the opposite side of the fire. Unless you choose otherwise. Elena didn't know what to say to that. She just stood there, feeling like the ground had shifted under her feet and she hadn't figured out how to stand yet. Tarek studied her for a moment. You are afraid. Wouldn't you be? Yes? He said it without hesitation, without shame. But fear is not weakness. It is only a warning. A warning about what? That you are still alive. He left before she could respond. Elena stood alone in the shelter, staring at the fire pit, at the mats, at the small pile of belongings that clearly weren't hers. She felt like crying. She felt like laughing. She felt like screaming until her voice gave out. Instead, she sat down, and for the first time in years, she let herself wonder what came next. Bishkek. The days blurred together at first. Elena woke when the sun rose, ate when food was offered, and spent most of her time trying to stay out of the way. The women didn't speak to her, not because they were cruel, but because she didn't speak their language and they didn't speak hers. The children stared at her like she was a ghost. The men ignored her entirely. Tarek was gone most of the time, out hunting or scouting or doing whatever it was leaders did. When he was in camp, he was quiet, watchful, always busy with something. He didn't push her. He didn't ask her questions. He just let her exist like he'd promised. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like waiting. On the fifth day, one of the older women approached her. She was small and weathered, with gray streaks in her hair and hands that looked like they'd worked every day of her life. She said something in Apache, and when Elena shook her head, the woman sighed and gestured for her to follow. Elena hesitated, then obeyed. The woman led her to the fire pit at the center of camp, where several other women were preparing food. She handed Elena a knife and a pile of roots, then mimed cutting them into pieces. Elena understood. She sat down and started cutting. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, Tarek returned to the shelter and found her sitting by the fire, sore-handed and exhausted. He glanced at the fresh cuts on her fingers. She'd been clumsy with the knife, and said, "You worked today." "They let me help." "Good." He sat down across from her, and for a while neither of them spoke. The fire crackled between them, and outside the camp settled into its evening rhythms, voices murmuring, children laughing, the smell of cooking meat drifting through the air. "Are you unhappy?" Tarek asked. Elena looked up, startled. "What? You do not speak. You do not smile. You sit alone." He tilted his head. "Are you unhappy?" "I don't know," Elena said honestly. "I don't know what I am." "That is fair." She studied him across the fire. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why did you really bring me here?" Tarek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I am tired of being alone." The honesty of it caught her off guard. She'd expected some practical answer, something about needing another pair of hands, or fulfilling a tradition, or proving a point. But this was just real. "You have a whole tribe," she said. "I do." "Then how are you alone?" "The same way you are." Elena didn't have an answer to that. Tarek stood. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be the same as today." "And the day after that?" "Yes." He left, and Elena lay down on her mat, staring up at the ceiling of the shelter. Outside, the night stretched wide and endless, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since James died, she didn't dream about the desert. The days kept coming, one after another, relentless and slow. Elena learned to grind corn. She learned which plants were safe to touch and which would leave her hands burning for hours. She learned the rhythm of the camp, the way mornings started quiet and evenings ended loud, the way the women moved together like a single organism, efficient and unstoppable. She learned a few words in Apache: water, fire, food. Thank you. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. Tarek was patient in a way that unnerved her. He never demanded anything. He never raised his voice. When she burned the flatbread she was trying to make, he just ate it without comment. When she asked him to teach her more words, he did, slow and deliberate, repeating them until she got the sounds right. On the 15th night, he came back to the shelter late, exhausted and streaked with dust. Elena had saved him some food, stew, still warm, and he took it without a word. They ate in silence, and when he was done, he leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. "Long day?" Elena asked. "Yes." "Hunting?" "Scouting." He opened one eye. "Soldiers." Elena's stomach clenched. "Close?" "Not yet, but they are moving this way." "What will you do?" "Watch. Wait. Move if we must." He closed his eye again. "It is always the same." "Doesn't that get exhausting?" "Yes." She wanted to ask more, but his face had gone still in that way it did when he was done talking. So she stayed quiet, and after a while she lay down on her mat and tried to sleep. But she kept thinking about soldiers, about wagons, about the life she'd left behind and the one she'd stumbled into, and about the way Tarek had looked at her earlier when she'd handed him the bowl of stew. Not like she was nothing, like she was there. But on the 21st night, something shifted. Elena didn't know what it was at first. Maybe it was the way Tarek sat closer to the fire than usual, or the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. Maybe it was the fact that she'd started noticing things, little things, like the scar on his shoulder, or the way his hands moved when he spoke, or the sound of his voice when he said her name. He asked her a question that night. "Do you regret staying?" Elena thought about it. "No. Even though you are not free. I'm more free here than I ever was before." Tarek frowned. "How?" "Because I chose this." She met his eyes. "I didn't choose James. I didn't choose the wagon. I didn't choose to end up in the desert. But I chose to stay here. That's more than I've ever had." He looked at her for a long time, and Elena felt something tighten in her chest, something that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way the firelight caught his face. "The moon is almost over," Tarek said quietly. "I know. You must choose again soon. I know that too. What will you choose?" Elena didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, scarred now, calloused from work, stronger than they'd ever been. She thought about the women who'd started speaking to her, the children who no longer ran away, the feeling of waking up in the morning and knowing where she was supposed to be. And she thought about Tarek, not as a bargain, not as a necessity, just as him. "I haven't decided yet," she lied. But she had. She already knew. The 22nd day arrived with no ceremony, no warning. Elena woke to the sound of voices outside the shelter, women talking, children playing, the usual morning noise that had become familiar enough to fade into background hum. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from sleeping on the mat, and rubbed at her eyes. The fire had gone out sometime during the night, leaving only ash and a lingering smell of smoke. Tarek's mat was empty. He'd left before dawn again, like he did most mornings. Elena had stopped asking where he went. She'd learned that he moved through the world like water, present, then gone, then back again, without explanation. It wasn't secretive. It was just how he was. She pushed herself up and stepped outside. The sun was already climbing, turning the sky from gray to gold, and the air had that sharp, clean quality it always had in the early hours before the heat set in. A few women were gathered near the fire pit, preparing food, and one of them, the older woman who'd first shown Elena how to cut roots, glanced up and nodded. Elena nodded back. It was the closest thing to conversation they'd managed in 3 weeks. She made her way toward the fire, her stomach tight with a feeling she couldn't name. The moon was almost over. 22 days down, 8 left. And then she'd have to make her choice official, out loud, in front of everyone. Stay or go. Except it didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt like something that had already happened, something she'd decided without realizing it, and now she was just waiting for the moment to catch up. She crouched down near the fire and accepted the bowl of grain mush one of the women handed her. It was bland and thick and tasted like nothing, but it filled the hollow space in her stomach, and that was enough. She ate slowly, watching the camp wake up around her, children darting between shelters, men checking weapons, women working with the same steady rhythm they always had. This was her life now, for better or worse. And the strange thing was, it didn't feel wrong. It felt like breathing. Someone called her name, or the version of her name they'd settled on, since none of them could quite manage the English pronunciation. Elena looked up and saw one of the younger women gesturing for her to follow. She set down the bowl and obeyed, trailing behind as they walked toward the edge of camp where the water jugs were kept. The woman handed her an empty jug and pointed toward the stream about half a mile out. Elena understood. She took the jug and started walking. The path to the stream had become familiar over the past weeks. Down through the canyon, past the cluster of rocks that looked like a broken tooth, around the bend where the ground turned soft and muddy. It was quiet out here, away from the camp, and Elena found herself relaxing in a way she couldn't when she was surrounded by people who still looked at her like she might vanish any second. She reached the stream and crouched down, filling the jug slowly. The water was cold and clear, and she cupped some in her hand and drank, then splashed her face. It felt good, clean. When she stood, Tarek was there. Elena jerked back, nearly dropping the jug. "You scared me. I did not mean to." He was standing a few yards away, half hidden in the shade of a cottonwood tree, watching her with that unreadable expression he wore like armor. "You come here often, every day." Someone has to get water. I know. He stepped closer and Elena noticed the way he moved. Careful, deliberate, like he was always aware of where his body was in space. You are learning. I'm trying. You are doing more than trying. He tilted his head. The women speak of you. Elena frowned. What do they say? That you work hard, that you do not complain, that you listen. He paused. They did not expect this. What did they expect? That you would leave, or die, or become useless. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. You have surprised them. Is that good or bad? Good. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she just stood there holding the jug, feeling the weight of it against her hip. Tarek watched her, and the silence stretched between them like a rope pulled taut. The moon is almost over, he said finally. I know. You must choose soon. I know that too. What will you choose? Elena looked at him, really looked. She saw the scar on his jaw, the way his hair fell loose around his shoulders, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that made him look older than he probably was. She saw the way he held himself, like he was carrying something heavy and had learned to bear it without complaint. And she realized something she hadn't let herself admit until now. She didn't want to leave. Not the camp, not the women, not the work, or the language, or the strange, quiet life she'd stumbled into. And not him. I don't know yet, she lied again. Tarek's eyes flickered, like he knew it was a lie but wasn't going to call her on it. When you decide, you will tell me. Yes. He turned to leave, then stopped. Elena? What? You do not have to be afraid. I'm not afraid. You are. He said it without judgment, without pity, but you do not have to be. He walked away before she could answer, disappearing into the trees like he'd never been there at all. Elena stood by the stream for a long time after that, staring at the water, feeling the sun on her back and the jug heavy in her hands. She thought about fear, about the way it had lived in her chest for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. And she thought about Tarek's voice, low and steady, saying you do not have to be afraid. Like it was that simple, like she could just decide to stop. She picked up the jug and started back toward camp. That night, Tarek didn't come back to the shelter until late. Elena was already lying on her mat, staring up at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the camp settling into sleep. She heard him before she saw him, footsteps, the rustle of the flap being pushed aside, the quiet scrape of him sitting down by the fire pit. She didn't move. She just lay there, pretending to be asleep, and listened to him breathe. After a while, he spoke. You are awake. Elena sighed and rolled onto her side. How do you always know? Your breathing changes. He poked at the embers in the fire pit, coaxing them back to life. When you sleep, it is slow. When you are awake, it is fast. That's unsettling. Why? Because it means you're paying attention. Tarek glanced at her, and in the dim light of the fire, his face looked softer than usual. Of course I am paying attention. Elena sat up, pulling her knees to her chest. Why? Because you are here. That's not a reason. It is the only reason. He fed a small stick into the fire and watched it catch. You are here. You are alive. You matter. The simplicity of it made Elena's throat tighten. She didn't know how to respond to that, didn't know how to explain that no one had ever said anything like that to her before. Not her father, not James, not anyone. So she just sat there, hugging her knees, and tried not to let him see her face. Do you regret it? She asked after a while. Regret what? Bringing me here. Tarek looked at her for a long moment. No. Even though I'm useless? You are not useless. I can barely speak your language. I burn half the food I try to cook. You are learning, Tarek interrupted. His voice was firm, but not unkind. That is not the same as being useless. Elena swallowed. What if I can't learn fast enough? Then you learn slowly. It does not matter. It matters to me. Why? Because I don't want to be a burden. Tarek shook his head. You are not a burden. You are a person. Those are not the same thing. Elena didn't know what to say to that either. She just sat there, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket, and wondered how someone could be so certain about things that felt so impossible. "The women like you," Tarek said after a while. "They tolerate me." "No. They like you." He poked the fire again. "They say you have a good spirit, that you do not give up." "I don't have much choice." "Everyone has a choice. You chose to stay. You chose to work. You chose to keep going." He looked at her. "That is not nothing." Elena felt something crack open inside her chest, something small and fragile and terrifying. She looked down at her hands, at the scars and calluses and dirt under her nails, and realized she didn't recognize them anymore. These weren't the hands of the girl who'd left Missouri. These weren't even the hands of the woman who'd knelt in the sand and waited to die. These were someone else's hands, someone stronger. "Thank you," she said quietly. Tarek frowned. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." "I did not bring you here to give up on you." He said it like it was obvious, like there was no other way to see it. "I brought you here because I thought you could survive. And you have." Elena looked at him across the fire, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she let herself really see him. Not as a captor or a bargain or a strange, distant figure she didn't understand. Just as a man. A tired, lonely man who'd offered her something no one else ever had. A chance. "Tarek," she said. "Yes?" "I'm not going to leave." He went still. "You have decided?" "Yes." "You are certain?" "Yes." He studied her for a long moment, and Elena thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or relief. But it was gone before she could be sure. "Then you will stay," he said. "I will stay." "For how long?" Elena took a breath. "As long as you'll have me." The fire crackled between them, and outside, the night pressed close and quiet. Tarek didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, looking at her, and Elena felt her heart hammer against her ribs. Then he nodded. Good. That was all. Just good. Like she'd told him the sky was blue or the sun would rise tomorrow. Like it didn't change everything, but it did. Elena lay back down on her mat, her whole body humming with something she couldn't name. She closed her eyes and listened to Tarek move around the shelter, banking the fire, settling onto his own mat. She heard him breathe, slow and steady, and she matched her breathing to his without thinking. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something that might have been peace. The next morning, everything was different and nothing was different. Elena woke to the same sounds, the same routines, the same rhythm of camp life. But now there was a weight to it, a permanence. She wasn't just passing through anymore. She wasn't waiting for the moon to end so she could make a choice. She'd made it. The women seemed to sense the shift, though Elena hadn't said anything. They spoke to her more freely, included her in tasks without being asked, corrected her language mistakes with patience instead of irritation. One of them, a younger woman named Kaya, who had a baby strapped to her back and a laugh that could cut through stone, pulled Elena aside and said something in rapid Apache that Elena only half understood. She caught the words stay and good and belong, and that was enough. Kaya smiled and squeezed her arm, and Elena smiled back, feeling something loosen in her chest. That afternoon, she was working near the fire pit when one of the older men approached. He was gray-haired and stern-faced, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, and he'd never spoken to her before. He said something to Tarek, who was standing nearby sharpening a knife, and Tarek answered in a tone that sounded almost defensive. The old man grunted and looked at Elena. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he said something else, something that made Tarek's jaw tighten. Elena didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It wasn't friendly. Tarek responded, his voice low and steady, and the old man shook his head and walked away. Elena set down the root she'd been peeling. What did he say? Tarek didn't look up from his knife. It does not matter. It sounded like it mattered. He does not trust you. Why not? Because you are not one of us. Because you came from the people who kill us and take our land. He paused. Because he lost his daughter to soldiers 3 winters ago, and he sees her in every white face. Elena's stomach turned. I'm sorry. Do not apologize. You did not kill her. But You are still here, Tarek interrupted. He finally looked at her, his eyes hard. That is all that matters. You are here, and you are trying, and that is more than most would do. What if he's right? What if I don't belong? You belong because you choose to belong. That is how it works. He sheathed the knife and stood. Do not let him make you doubt yourself. He will come around, or he will not. Either way, you stay. Elena wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just nodded and went back to peeling roots, her hands shaking slightly. That night, Tarek sat closer to her than usual. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, the weight of his presence. They didn't talk much. They just sat there, side by side, and watched the fire burn down to embers. At some point, Elena's head drooped, and she jerked herself awake. Tarek glanced at her. You're tired. I'm always tired. Then sleep. I don't want to. Why not? Elena didn't have a good answer to that. She just knew that she didn't want this moment to end, didn't want to lie down and close her eyes and wake up to find that everything had shifted again. Tarek seemed to understand. He didn't push. He just sat there, steady and solid. And after a while, Elena let herself lean against his shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stayed. And Elena closed her eyes and let herself rest. The days that followed blurred together in the best way. Elena worked. She learned. She laughed with Kaya and burned flatbread and mispronounced words and slowly began to feel like she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Tarek was there, always on the periphery, watching and waiting and never pushing. He taught her more words. He corrected her when she held a knife wrong. He sat beside her at the fire and told her stories about the land, about his people, about the way things used to be before the soldiers came. Elena listened. She asked questions. She learned that he'd lost his wife 2 years ago, not to violence, but to sickness. That he'd been alone since then, carrying the weight of leadership without complaint, but feeling the absence of partnership like a missing limb. Is that why you brought me here? Elena asked one night. Tarek considered the question. Partly. What's the other part? I saw you in the sand and I thought you looked like someone who did not want to die. He glanced at her. I was right. What if you'd been wrong? Then you would have walked and I would have let you. Would you have felt guilty? No. He said it without hesitation. Guilt is for people who force others. I gave you a choice. What you did with it was yours. Elena thought about that. You're strange. So are you. Fair. They sat in silence for a while, and then Tarek said, The moon ends in 3 days. Elena's heart skipped. I know. You said you would stay. I will. Then there will be a ceremony. Elena blinked. A what? A ceremony to make it official, to show the tribe that you are not a guest anymore. He looked at her. If you still want this. I do. Good. Paused. It will not be easy. Some will still doubt you. Some will never accept you. But if you stay, you will have a place here. A real one. Elena's throat tightened. What do I have to do? Speak. In front of everyone. Say that you choose this life, that you choose me. He held her gaze. Can you do that? Yes? Even if it is hard. Especially if it is hard. Tarek's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. You're stronger than I thought. You keep saying that because it keeps being true. The ceremony happened on the 28th night. The whole tribe gathered near the central fire, and Elena stood in the middle of them, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Tarek stood beside her, his face calm and unreadable, and one of the elders, a woman with white hair and eyes like flint, stepped forward and began to speak. Elena didn't understand most of the words, but she understood the tone. This was serious. This was binding. The elder finished speaking and looked at Elena. Tarek leaned in and murmured a translation. She asks if you choose to stay, if you choose this life, if you choose me. Elena's voice came out steadier than she expected. Yes. The elder said something else, and Tarek translated again. She asks if you will honor our ways, if you will work and learn and become one of us. Yes. She asks if you understand that this is not temporary, that if you stay, you cannot leave without consequence. Elena looked at Tarek. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, something that looked like hope. Yes, she said. I understand. The elder nodded and said something to the crowd. A few people murmured. A few looked skeptical. But no one objected. Then the elder took Elena's hand and Tarek's hand and placed them together. She said something else, something that sounded like a blessing or a warning, and then she stepped back. Tarek's hand was warm and rough and steady. He didn't let go. The crowd began to disperse, and Kaya came up and hugged Elena, laughing and saying something in Apache that Elena didn't catch. Other women followed, patting her shoulder, nodding their approval. Even the old man who'd glared at her earlier gave her a grudging nod before walking away. Tarek pulled her aside, away from the crowd, and they stood together in the shadows at the edge of camp. It is done, he said. Just like that? Just like that. He looked down at their joined hands. You are one of us now. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. I didn't think it would feel like this. Like what? Like coming home. Tarek's grip tightened, just slightly. You are home. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time she let herself see everything she'd been trying not to see. The way he looked at her, the way he stayed close without crowding, the way he'd given her a choice and then respected it, no matter what. Tarek? She said. Yes? I don't want to sleep on my own mat tonight. He went very still. What do you want? I want to sleep next to you. Are you certain? Yes. He studied her face, searching for doubt, for hesitation, but there was none. Elena had made her choice. All of it. Not just the tribe, not just the life. Him. Then we will go, Tarek said quietly. They walked back to the shelter together, and when they stepped inside, Tarek let the flap fall closed behind them. The fire was low, casting long shadows across the walls, and the air was cool and still. Elena's hands were shaking. She didn't know why. This wasn't fear. It was something else, something bigger and more overwhelming. Tarek noticed. You do not have to... I want to, Elena interrupted. I'm just nervous. Why? Because I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I. That surprised her. You don't? No? He stepped closer, and Elena could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the same uncertainty she felt. I have not done this in a long time, and I have never done it like this. Like what? With someone who chose me. Not because they had to, not because it was expected, but because they wanted to. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair out of her face. That is different. Elena's breath caught. Good different? Yes. She closed the distance between them, and when she kissed him, it wasn't desperate or frantic or any of the things she'd expected. It was slow, careful, like they were both learning something new. Tarek's hands came up to cradle her face, and he kissed her back with a gentleness that made her chest ache. They stood there for a long time, just kissing, just breathing, just being, and then, slowly, they sank down onto his mat together. Elena didn't know what she'd expected, but it wasn't this. It wasn't the way Tarek touched her, reverent, almost hesitant, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. It wasn't the way he murmured her name against her skin, or the way he asked, "Is this good, and do you want this?" and waited for her answer every time. It wasn't the way she felt safe. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. The fire had burned down to nothing, and the shelter was dark and quiet. Are you all right? Tarek asked. Elena smiled against his skin. Yes. Good. Are you? Yes. They fell silent, and Elena listened to the steady thump of his heartbeat under her ear. She felt exhausted and exhilarated and more alive than she'd ever been. Tarek, she said. Yes? Thank you. For what? For giving me a choice. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, You gave me one too. Elena didn't understand. What do you mean? You could have left. You could have walked away at the end of the moon, but you stayed. He tightened his arm around her. You chose me. That is a gift I did not expect. Elena closed her eyes and let herself sink into the warmth of him, into the weight of his words, into the impossible reality of where she was and who she was with. I choose you again, she whispered. Tarek didn't answer, but he didn't need to. His hand came up to stroke her hair, slow and soothing, and Elena felt herself drifting toward sleep. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. The 30th day came and went without fanfare. Elena woke beside Tarek, tangled in blankets and warmth, and realized the moon was over. The bargain was done, and she was still here. Tarek stirred beside her and opened his eyes. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and then he smiled, a real smile, small and soft and utterly unguarded. You stayed, he said. I told you I would. I know, but I did not let myself believe it until now. Elena reached up and touched his face. Believe it. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. I do. They lay there for a while longer, and then the sounds of the camp waking up filtered through the walls of the shelter, and they both sighed. We should get up, Elena said. We should. Neither of them moved. Eventually, Tarek sat up and pulled on his clothes, and Elena did the same. They stepped outside together, into the bright morning light, and Elena felt the weight of eyes on her, curious, approving, some still skeptical. But she didn't care. She belonged here now. Not because someone told her to, not because she had nowhere else to go, because she chose it, and that made all the difference. The weeks that followed the ceremony blurred into something Elena had never experienced before. Routine that didn't feel like a cage. She woke before dawn most mornings, helped prepare food, worked alongside the other women, and slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, stopped thinking of herself as separate from them. The language came easier now. Not fluent, not even close, but enough to understand jokes, enough to contribute to conversations, enough to feel like she wasn't just nodding along anymore. Kaya became something close to a friend. She was younger than Elena by a few years, with a sharp tongue and a baby boy named Nico who never seemed to stop crying unless he was strapped to his mother's back. Kaya taught Elena how to tan hides without ruining them, how to identify which plants would stop bleeding and which would make you sick, how to move through the canyon without making noise. In return, Elena taught her a few English words, mostly curses, which Kaya found hilarious. Say it again, Kaya said one afternoon, grinning as she wrestled a stubborn piece of leather into submission. Damn it to hell, Elena repeated. Kaya cackled and tried to mimic the sounds, mangling them so badly that Elena couldn't help but laugh. What does it mean? It means you're angry. Then I will use it often. Kaya tied off the leather and sat back, wiping sweat from her forehead. You are different now. Elena glanced up. Different how? Before, you looked like a bird with broken wings. Now you look like you might fly. Elena didn't know what to say to that. She just ducked her head and went back to her own work, feeling something warm and uncomfortable settle in her chest. That night she told Tarek what Kaya had said. They were lying together in the shelter, his arm draped over her waist, her back pressed against his chest. It had become their routine, work all day, eat together, talk by the fire until exhaustion dragged them down, then curl up like this and let the world fade away. Do you think it's true? Elena asked. That I'm different? Tarek was quiet for a moment, his breath warm against her neck. Yes. How? You smile now. You did not smile before. Elena thought about that. He was right. She hadn't smiled in years, not real smiles anyway, not the kind that reached her eyes and made her chest feel light. I didn't have much to smile about. And now you do? Yes. Good. His arm tightened around her. You deserve to smile. Elena rolled over to face him, and in the dim light from the dying fire, she could see the lines of his face, the scar on his jaw, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. Do you smile more now? I do not know. Do I? I think so. Tarek considered this. Perhaps. It has been a long time since I had a reason. And now you do? Yes. Elena kissed him, slow and deep, and felt his hand come up to cup the back of her head. They stayed like that for a while, just kissing, just touching, just existing in the small, quiet space they'd carved out for themselves. When they finally pulled apart, Elena rested her forehead against his and whispered, "I don't want to lose this." "You will not?" "How do you know?" "Because we will not let it happen." Elena wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this fragile, impossible thing they'd built could last. But there was a part of her, the part that had learned early and hard that good things didn't stay, that couldn't quite let go of the fear. Tarek seemed to sense it. He pulled back just enough to look at her. "What are you afraid of?" "Everything," Elena admitted. "That I'll wake up and this will be gone. That something will happen and I'll lose you. That I'll do something wrong and the tribe will decide I don't belong after all. None of that will happen. You don't know that. I know that you are here, that you are trying, that you are stronger than you think." He traced a finger along her jaw. "And I know that I will not let you go easily." Elena's throat tightened. "Promise?" "I do not make promises I cannot keep, but I will tell you this. I want you here. Not because of a bargain, not because I need a wife, because I want you." He paused. "Is that enough?" It was more than enough. It was everything. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice, and Tarek kissed her forehead before pulling her close again. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and Elena dreamed of flying. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks later. Elena was out gathering wood with a few of the other women when she heard shouting from the direction of camp. She dropped the bundle of sticks she'd been carrying and started running, her heart hammering in her chest. The other women followed, and by the time they reached the edge of camp, a crowd had already gathered near the central fire. Tarek stood in the middle of it, facing off against two men Elena didn't recognize. They were older, weathered, with rifles slung across their backs, and the kind of hard, suspicious eyes that told her everything she needed to know about who they were. Traitors. Or worse. She pushed through the crowd until she was close enough to hear. The men were speaking English, their voices loud and aggressive, and Tarek was answering in the same language, slower, more deliberate, but just as firm. "We're not here to cause trouble," one of the men said. He was tall and thin, with a face like a hatchet and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're just passing through, thought we'd stop and see if you folks needed anything." "We do not," Tarek said. "You sure about that? We've got flour, sugar, ammunition. We do not need your supplies. What about information?" The man's smile widened. "Word is, there's soldiers moving through the territory. Fort's been reinforced. They're looking for camps like this one." Elena's stomach dropped. Around her, the crowd shifted uneasily, and she saw several of the warriors exchange glances. Tarek's expression didn't change. "We know about the soldiers." "Do you? Because it sounds like you're sitting here waiting for them to show up." The man leaned in, his voice dropping. "You've got women and children here. You really want to risk it?" "We are not interested in your advice," Tarek said coldly, "or your presence. Leave." The man's smile faded. "That's not very hospitable. You are not guests. You are intruders. Leave now, or you will be removed." The second man, shorter, stockier, with a scar running across his nose, shifted his weight and rested a hand on his rifle. "You threatening us?" "I am telling you the truth." Tarek didn't move, but there was something in his stance that made Elena's skin prickle. He looked like a coiled spring, ready to snap. "You have 10 breaths to leave. After that, I will not be responsible for what happens." The two men looked at each other. For a moment, Elena thought they might actually try something stupid, but then the tall one spat into the dirt and turned away. "Fine, we're going, but don't say we didn't warn you." They walked toward their horses, mounted up, and rode out of camp without looking back. The crowd watched them go, silent and tense, and didn't relax until they disappeared over the ridge. Tarek turned and said something in Apache, his voice calm but commanding. The crowd began to disperse, and Elena saw him exchange a few words with one of the older warriors before making his way toward her. "You should not have run back here," he said when he reached her. "I heard shouting." "And you thought running toward danger was wise?" "I thought you might need help." Tarek's jaw tightened. "I do not need you to protect me." "I wasn't trying to protect you, I was trying to—" Elena stopped, frustrated. "I don't know, I just wanted to be here." He studied her for a moment, and some of the tension drained from his face. I know, but it is not safe. Those men were looking for weakness. If they had seen you, they would have what? Realized you have a white woman living here? Elena crossed her arms. They probably already know. Perhaps, but that does not mean I want you standing in front of them. Too bad. I'm not hiding. Tarek looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. You are stubborn. You married me anyway. I am beginning to regret that decision. Elena knew he was joking, but the words still stung a little. She turned to walk away and Tarek caught her arm. Elena, wait. She stopped but didn't look at him. I did not mean that, he said quietly. I do not regret you. Not for a moment. Then why did you say it? Because I'm tired, and I am angry, and I am afraid. He let go of her arm. Those men were right. The soldiers are coming. And when they do, they will not care that we have done nothing wrong. They will see us, and they will decide we are a threat, and they will act accordingly. Elena turned to face him. What are we going to do? Move, soon, before they find us. He glanced toward the ridge where the traders had disappeared. But first we need to know how much time we have. How do we do that? Scouts, watchers. We will send men to track the soldiers' movements and report back. He looked at her. It will be dangerous, and we may not have much warning. So we might have to leave in the middle of the night? Yes. Elena's chest tightened. She thought about the shelter, the fire pit, the small corner of the world she'd started to think of as home. Where will we go? North. Deeper into the canyon. There are places the soldiers cannot follow. He paused. It will be harder, colder, less food, but we will survive. We always do. Tarek almost smiled. Yes, we do. Tetem. The scouts left the next morning, 3 men, including one of Tarek's closest friends, a lean, sharp-eyed warrior named Dakota who moved through the world like a shadow. Elena watched them go, her stomach tight with worry, and tried to focus on her work. But it was hard to concentrate when every sound made her jump, every distant shout made her heart race. Kaya noticed. You are like a rabbit today, she said, nudging Elena with her elbow, always looking over your shoulder. I can't help it. The scouts will return. They always do. What if they don't? Kaya's expression sobered. Then we mourn and we move on. That is how it is. Elena hated how matter-of-fact she sounded, but she also knew Kaya was right. This was the reality of their lives. Constant movement, constant vigilance, constant loss. You couldn't afford to fall apart every time something went wrong. You just had to keep going. That night, Tarek didn't come back to the shelter until late. Elena was already lying down, staring at the ceiling and trying not to let her thoughts spiral. When he finally pushed through the flap, he looked exhausted. Any news? She asked. Not yet. He sat down heavily and pulled off his boots. It will take them a few days to find the soldiers and get back. And if the soldiers move faster than we think, then we will deal with it. He lay down beside her and pulled her close. Stop worrying. I can't. Try. Elena pressed her face against his chest and tried to breathe. His heartbeat was steady under her ear, and after a while the rhythm of it started to calm her down. Tarek? Yes? If something happens, nothing will happen. But if it does, Elena. He tilted her face up so she had to look at him. I will not let anything happen to you. Do you understand? You can't promise that. I can. And I do. His eyes were fierce, unyielding. You are mine. I will protect you, even if it costs me everything. Elena's breath caught. She wanted to argue, to tell him not to say things like that, not to make promises he might not be able to keep, but the look on his face stopped her. He meant it, every word. Okay, she whispered. Good. He kissed her forehead and pulled her close again. Now sleep. We will need our strength. Elena closed her eyes and tried to obey, but sleep was a long time coming. The scouts returned 4 days later just after dawn. Elena was helping prepare breakfast when she heard the commotion, shouts, running footsteps, the sharp bark of Tarek's voice calling for the warriors to gather. She dropped the bowl she was holding and ran toward the central fire, her pulse pounding in her ears. Dakota stood in the middle of the crowd, dusty and exhausted, his face grim. The other two scouts were with him, and all three looked like they'd been running for days. Tarek was already there, firing questions in Apache, and Dakota answered in short, clipped sentences that made the crowd murmur uneasily. Elena pushed her way to the front and grabbed Kaya's arm. "What's happening?" "Soldiers," Kaya said, her face pale. 2 days away, maybe less." "How many?" "Dakota says at least 40. Maybe more." Elena's stomach dropped. 40 soldiers. Against maybe 15 warriors, most of them armed with bows and a few old rifles. It wasn't a fight they could win. Tarek said something else, and the crowd erupted into argument. Some of the warriors wanted to stand and fight, others wanted to leave immediately. The women stood silent, holding their children close, their faces tight with fear. Tarek raised a hand and the noise died down. He spoke again, his voice calm and commanding, and though Elena couldn't understand every word, she got the gist. They were leaving. Now. No debate. The camp exploded into motion. Shelters were torn down, supplies packed, children gathered. Elena worked alongside the other women, moving on autopilot, her mind racing. 2 days. They had 2 days to put as much distance as possible between themselves and 40 armed soldiers who wouldn't hesitate to kill them all. Tarek found her in the chaos, his hand closing around her wrist. "Stay close to me." "I will." "Do not fall behind. Do not stop for anything. Do you understand?" "Yes." He pulled her close and kissed her hard, then let her go and disappeared back into the crowd. Elena watched him go, her chest tight with fear, and then forced herself to keep moving. There was no time to fall apart, not now. Within 2 hours, the camp was gone. They left no trace behind, no fire pits, no shelters, no sign that anyone had ever been there. The group moved north into the narrow canyon passages that twisted and turned like a maze, and Elena followed, her legs burning, her lungs screaming. They walked all day. No breaks except to drink water, no stops except when the children absolutely couldn't go any farther. By the time the sun started to set, Elena's feet were blistered and bleeding, and she was stumbling more than walking. Kaya grabbed her arm and steadied her, murmuring something encouraging, and Elena nodded numbly and kept going. They made camp that night in a shallow cave, hidden from view and defensible if it came to that. There was no fire, no noise, just exhausted bodies huddled together in the dark, trying to sleep. Elena lay beside Tarek, shivering despite the warmth of his body pressed against hers. "Do you think we're far enough?" "No." "Then why did we stop?" "Because if we do not rest, we will collapse, and then we will die." He wrapped an arm around her. "Sleep. We move again at first light." Elena wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. They moved for 3 more days. The terrain grew rougher, the air colder, the supplies thinner. Elena's body screamed in protest, but she didn't complain. No one did. They just kept walking, kept climbing, kept pushing forward because the alternative was death. On the 4th night, they stopped in a high canyon that opened into a small valley. There was a stream, a few scraggly trees, and enough space to spread out. Tarek called a meeting with the warriors and the elders, and they talked in low, urgent voices while the rest of the camp tried to rest. Elena sat beside Kaya, gnawing on a piece of dried meat that tasted like leather. Nico was fussing in his mother's arms, and Kaya rocked him absently, her face drawn and tired. "Do you think we're safe?" Elena asked. "No." Kaya didn't sugarcoat it. "But we are safer than we were." "What if they keep following us?" "Then we keep running." Kaya looked at her. "That is what we do. We run, and we survive, and we do not give up. That is who we are." Elena wanted to say something, wanted to argue, to rage against the unfairness of it all, but she didn't. She just nodded and took another bite of the terrible meat. Tarek found her later after the meeting had ended. He sat down beside her without a word, and Elena leaned against him, too exhausted to speak. "We are staying here," he said after a while. "For how long?" "As long as we can. The soldiers will not find us easily. This place is hidden, and the paths are difficult." He paused. "But it will not be comfortable. Food will be scarce, water is limited. We will have to ration everything." I don't care. As long as we're alive. Tarek's arm came around her shoulders. You're stronger than I thought you would be. You've said that before. Because it continues to be true. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I am proud of you. Elena's throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded and let herself lean into him, drawing strength from his solid, steady presence. They sat like that for a long time, watching the stars come out one by one, and Elena thought about how far she'd come. From a woman tied to a horse, certain she was going to die, to this, sitting beside the man she loved, part of a tribe that had accepted her, fighting for a life she'd never imagined she could have. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't safe, but it was hers, and she wasn't going to give it up without a fight. Mom. The days in the high canyon settled into a new, harsher rhythm. Food was scarce, mostly roots, dried meat, and whatever small game the hunters could catch. The stream provided water, but it was cold and tasted faintly of minerals. The nights were frigid, and Elena woke most mornings with frost on her blankets and her breath misting in the air. But they were alive, and that was enough. Elena threw herself into work, helping the women stretch what little they had, learning how to set snares, how to preserve food, how to make a fire that didn't produce much smoke. Kaya taught her how to mend clothes with sinew and bone needles, how to tell which roots were worth digging up and which would make you sick. The older women stopped treating her like an outsider and started treating her like one of them, correcting her mistakes, trusting her with important tasks, including her in decisions. It felt like belonging. Real belonging. Not the tentative, conditional kind she'd known in the lower camp, but something deeper, something earned. Tarek noticed. You have found your place, he said one night as they lay together, wrapped in every blanket they owned. I think so. How does it feel? Elena thought about it. Strange. Good. Terrifying. Why terrifying? Because I'm afraid it won't last. Tarek was quiet for a moment. Nothing lasts forever, but that does not mean we should not fight for it while we have it. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, it is supposed to be true. Elena huffed a laugh and burrowed closer to him. You're terrible at comfort. I know. He sounded amused, but I am good at other things. Like what? Like keeping you warm. That's true. And keeping you safe. Also true. And making you smile. Elena tilted her head back to look at him. Are you fishing for compliments? Perhaps. His mouth quirked. Is it working? Maybe. He kissed her, slow and thorough, and Elena let herself forget about the cold, the hunger, the soldiers somewhere out there hunting them. For a few stolen moments, there was only this, the two of them, tangled together, safe in the darkness. When they finally pulled apart, Tarek rested his forehead against hers. I love you. The words hit Elena like a punch to the chest. He'd never said it before. Neither of them had. It had always been there, unspoken but understood, woven into every touch, every glance, every quiet moment. But hearing it out loud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. I love you too, she whispered. Tarek's eyes closed, and he let out a breath like he'd been holding it for a long time. Good. Just good? What else should I say? I don't know, something romantic? I am not romantic. I've noticed. He smiled against her mouth. You love me anyway. I do. They fell asleep like that, holding each other so tightly it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. And for the first time in weeks, Elena didn't dream about running. She dreamed about staying. Asa. The scouts reported back a week later. The soldiers had moved on, heading east toward the settlements. They'd searched the lower canyon, found the abandoned camp, and kept going. They hadn't found the trail north. The relief was palpable. People laughed for the first time in days. Children played without being shushed. The warriors relaxed their constant vigilance just enough to breathe. But Tarek remained cautious. They will come back, he told Elena that night. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but they will come back. Then we'll run again. Yes. And we'll keep running. Yes. Elena looked at him. For how long? For as long as it takes. He met her eyes. Until they stop hunting us. Or until we are all dead. The bluntness of it should have scared her, but it didn't. It just made her sad. This was the reality they lived in. Constant threat, constant flight, constant survival. There was no happy ending waiting at the end. There was just the next day, and the day after that, and the hope that they'd see both. I wish it could be different, Elena said. So do I. Do you ever think about leaving? Going somewhere they can't follow? Every day. Tarek's voice was heavy. But there is nowhere they cannot follow. They want this land and they will take it. All we can do is make it as difficult as possible. That doesn't seem like much. It is not. But it is all we have. He pulled her close. And I would rather die fighting for what I have than give it up without a fight. Elena understood. She didn't like it, but she understood. Then we fight. Yes. Together. Always. They sat in silence for a while, and then Elena said, Tarek? Yes? If something happens to you, it will not. But if it does, Elena. He turned her face toward his. If something happens to me, you will survive. You will take care of yourself, and you will keep going, because that is who you are. I don't want to survive without you. You will. He said it with absolute certainty. Because you are strong. Because you do not give up. Because you are the woman who chose to stay when she could have walked away. He kissed her forehead. And because I need to know that you will. Elena's eyes burned. That's not fair. I know, but I need you to promise me anyway. Tarek, promise me. Elena swallowed hard. I promise. Good. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. I will hold you to that. Elena buried her face in his chest and tried not to cry. She didn't want to think about a world without him in it. She didn't want to imagine waking up alone or eating alone or facing the endless stretch of days without his steady presence beside her. But she also knew he was right. If something happened, if he died, if she lost him, she would have to keep going. Not because she wanted to, but because she'd promised. And Elena Cross kept her promises now. Winter set in hard and fast. The high canyon became a frozen wasteland, and the tribe hunkered down, rationing food and huddling together for warmth. Elena had never been so cold in her life. Her fingers went numb, her lips cracked and bled, and every breath felt like swallowing knives. But she didn't complain. No one did. They just endured. Tarek grew quieter as the weeks passed, the weight of leadership pressing down on him like a physical thing. He spent long hours with the other warriors, planning, strategizing, preparing for the spring when they'd have to move again. Elena watched him wear himself down, watched the lines around his eyes deepen, watched him carry the burden of keeping everyone alive without asking for help. One night, she confronted him. You need to rest. I will rest when we are safe. You're going to kill yourself. Better me than someone else. Elena grabbed his arm. Don't say that. It is the truth. I don't care. You're not allowed to die just because you're tired. Tarek looked at her, and for the first time in days, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. You're giving me orders now? Yes. Bold. You married a bold woman. I did. He pulled her close. And I do not regret it. Then listen to me. Rest, please, Tarek sighed. I will try. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. Elena took it and held on tight. That night, she made him lie down and stayed beside him, her hand over his heart, counting the beats until his breathing slowed and he finally fell asleep. She stayed awake long after, watching him, memorizing the planes of his face, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the small scar above his left eyebrow. She loved him so much it hurt, and she was terrified of losing him. But she didn't say it out loud. She just held him and prayed to whatever forces might be listening that they'd make it through this, that they'd see spring, that they'd have more time. Because she wasn't ready to let go, not yet, not ever. Spring came slowly to the high canyon, creeping in with muddy thaw and bitter winds that cut through every layer of clothing. Elena had never been so grateful to see green in her life. The first shoots of grass pushing through the snow felt like a miracle, and when the stream started running faster, no longer choked with ice, she wanted to cry with relief. They'd made it through the winter, barely. 3 of the elders had died. 2 from sickness, 1 simply from age and exhaustion. A child had been lost to fever despite everything the healers tried. The tribe had grown thinner, harder, more worn around the edges. But they were alive. Elena stood at the edge of the stream one morning, washing clothes in water so cold it made her fingers ache, and thought about how different she was from the woman who'd arrived here 9 months ago. That woman had been soft, uncertain, half broken. This woman had calluses on her hands and scars on her arms, and a spine made of something stronger than fear. "You are thinking too hard," Kaya said, splashing water at her. Elena jerked back, laughing. "Stop that!" "Make me!" Kaya grinned and dunked another piece of fabric into the stream. Nico was strapped to her back, sleeping peacefully despite the cold. "You always get that look when you are thinking, like you are trying to solve a problem that has no answer." "Maybe I am." "Then stop. Some problems do not need solving, they just need surviving." Elena wrung out the shirt she'd been washing and draped it over a rock to dry. "Is that your philosophy for everything?" "Yes, it is simpler that way." Kaya glanced at her. "You are worried about something." "I'm always worried about something." "More than usual, then?" Elena hesitated. She hadn't told anyone yet, hadn't even told Tarek, though she was pretty sure he'd started to suspect. "I think I might be pregnant." Kaya froze, then slowly turned to stare at her. "You think?" "I've missed 2 bleeds, maybe 3, I'm not sure. Everything's been so chaotic I lost track." Elena looked down at her hands. "And I've been sick in the mornings, not a lot, just enough to notice." "Have you told Tarek?" "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because I don't know if it's real, and because—" Elena trailed off, searching for the right words. "Because I don't know if I want it to be real." Kaya's expression softened. "You are afraid." "Of course I'm afraid. We barely have enough food. We're still running from soldiers. A baby would be—" She stopped, her throat tight. "It would be one more thing to worry about, one more person to keep alive." "It would also be hope," Kaya said quietly. "A future. Something to fight for that is not just survival." Elena wanted to believe that, but all she could think about was the child who died during the winter, the mother's wail cutting through the frozen night like a knife. "What if I lose it?" "Then you lose it, and you grieve, and you keep going." Kaya reached over and squeezed her hand. "But what if you do not lose it? What if you bring a child into this world, and that child grows strong and lives a good life? Is that not worth the fear?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." Kaya's grip tightened. "You chose to stay here. You chose Tarek. You chose this life. A child is just another choice. And I think you have already made it." Elena pulled her hand away and went back to washing clothes, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. Kaya was right. She had already made the choice somewhere deep down where words didn't reach. She was just too scared to admit it. That night she told Tarek. They were lying in the shelter, the fire burned down to embers, and Elena had been rehearsing the words in her head for hours. But when she finally opened her mouth, all that came out was, "I think I'm pregnant." Tarek went absolutely still. For a long moment he didn't say anything, and Elena's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Then he rolled over to face her, his eyes searching hers in the darkness. "Are you certain?" "No, but I think so." "How long?" 2 months. Maybe 3. Tarek's hand came up to rest on her stomach, flat and warm through the fabric of her dress. "And you are afraid?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Of what?" "Everything. Losing it. Losing you. Not being a good mother. Bringing a child into this—" She gestured around the shelter, at the thin walls and the cold air and the constant threat hanging over all of them. "Into this. Those are all reasonable fears. That's not helpful. I'm not trying to be helpful. I'm trying to be honest." His thumb traced small circles on her stomach. "Do you want this child?" Elena closed her eyes. "I don't know. Part of me does. Part of me thinks it's the worst idea in the world." "And the rest of you?" "The rest of me is terrified." Tarek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want this child." Elena's eyes flew open. "You do?" "Yes." He said it simply, without hesitation. "I want a child with you." I want to see your face in theirs. I want to teach them to hunt and ride and survive. I want to give them the life I never had, one where they know they are loved, where they know they belong. But what if nothing? His voice was firm. You asked me what I want. I am telling you. But what you want matters more. This is your body, your choice. And whatever you decide, I will support you. Elena felt tears slide down her temples and into her hair. What if I'm not strong enough? You are the strongest person I know. I'm not. You are. Tarek leaned in and kissed her forehead. You survived things that would have broken most people. You walked into a life that terrified you and made it your own. You learned a new language, a new way of living, and you did not give up. If that is not strength, I do not know what is. But a baby? A baby is just another challenge, and you will face it the same way you have faced everything else, with courage and stubbornness and that ridiculous refusal to quit even when it would be easier. He pulled her close. You are not alone in this. You have me. You have Kaya. You have the whole tribe. We will help you. We will protect you. And we will love this child as our own. Elena buried her face in his chest and let herself cry. Not from fear, though that was still there, but from relief. From the overwhelming realization that she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to carry this by herself, that there were people who would stand beside her no matter what. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay, I want this. She pulled back to look at him. I'm still terrified, but I want it. Tarek's face broke into a smile, a real one, wide and unguarded and full of something that looked like joy. Good. Just good? What else should I say? Elena laughed through her tears. I don't know, something about how happy you are? I am happy. I thought that was obvious. You could stand to be more obvious. I will work on that. He kissed her, soft and lingering, and then rested his forehead against hers. Thank you. For what? For choosing me. For choosing this. For giving me something I thought I would never have again. Elena's throat tightened. I should be thanking you. Then we will thank each other. His hand moved back to her stomach, protective and possessive. And we will figure out the rest as we go. The news spread through the camp faster than Elena expected. By the next afternoon, everyone knew, and the reactions varied wildly. Some of the women were thrilled, fussing over her and offering advice she didn't ask for. Others were more reserved, their congratulations tinged with worry. The warriors clapped Tarek on the back and made jokes Elena didn't fully understand, but that made him smile anyway. The old man who'd glared at her when she first arrived, the one who'd lost his daughter to soldiers, approached her by the fire that evening. Elena braced herself for criticism, for disapproval, for something harsh, but all he did was nod and say in halting English, "Strong child, like mother." Then he walked away, leaving Elena staring after him with tears in her eyes. Kaya was insufferable. I told you, she crowed, balancing Nico on her hip. I told you it would be good. You did. And you did not believe me. I was scared. You are always scared. But you do it anyway. That is what makes you brave. Kaya grinned. Now you will have a baby, and Nico will have someone to play with, and I will finally have someone to complain about motherhood with. Elena laughed. Is it that bad? It is wonderful and terrible and exhausting and the best thing I have ever done. Kaya's expression softened. You will see. Elena hoped she was right. But as the days passed and her body started to change, her breast tender, her stomach beginning to round, the sickness in the mornings getting worse before it got better, she found herself believing it a little more. This was real. This was happening. And somehow, that made it less terrifying. Tarek became insufferably protective. He wouldn't let her lift anything heavy. He brought her extra food even though they were still rationing. He hovered whenever she went near the stream or climbed on rocks or did anything he deemed remotely dangerous. I'm pregnant, not dying, Elena said one afternoon after he'd physically blocked her from carrying a water jug. I know. Then stop treating me like I'm made of glass. I am not treating you like glass. I'm treating you like someone who is carrying my child and should not be taking unnecessary risks. Carrying water is not a risk. It is if you slip and fall. Elena glared at him. I've been carrying water for months. I haven't fallen yet. That does not mean you will not. You're being ridiculous. I am being cautious. You're being overbearing. Tarek crossed his arms. Would you prefer I ignore you? Yes. Liar. Elena wanted to stay mad, but she couldn't. He looked so earnest, so determined to protect her from every possible harm that it was almost endearing. Almost. Fine. You can carry the water, but I'm still doing everything else. We will see. No, we won't. I'm doing it. Elena, Tarek. She stepped closer and poked him in the chest. I love you. But if you try to wrap me in cotton and keep me from living my life, I will make your existence miserable. Do you understand? His mouth twitched. Yes. Good. She kissed him quickly and walked away, leaving him standing there looking torn between amused and frustrated. Kaya, who'd been watching the whole exchange, cackled. She has you figured out. She does, Tarek admitted. You are in trouble. I know. Good. You deserve it. The scouts brought troubling news in late spring. The soldiers were moving again, not toward them, but sweeping through the territory in a broad pattern that suggested they were hunting for something, or someone. The tribe held a council meeting, and Elena sat beside Tarek, listening to the debate, even though she only understood half of it. Some wanted to move deeper into the mountains. Others wanted to stay put and hope the soldiers passed by. A few of the younger warriors wanted to fight, to ambush the soldiers before they got too close. Tarek listened to all of it, his face unreadable, and then made his decision. They would move. Not immediately, but soon. They'd wait until Elena was far enough along that travel wouldn't risk the pregnancy, and then they'd relocate to a place even more remote, even harder to reach. It would be brutal, but it would be safer. Elena didn't argue. She trusted him, and she knew that staying in one place for too long was a death sentence. The weeks leading up to the move were tense. The warriors prepared, the women packed, the children sensed the unease and grew quieter. Elena helped as much as Tarek would let her, which wasn't much, and spent the rest of her time trying not to think about what lay ahead. One night, she woke to find Tarek sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. She sat up, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Can't sleep? No. What's wrong? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I am afraid. Elena's chest tightened. Tarek never admitted fear. He carried it silently, buried so deep that most people didn't even know it was there. Hearing him say it out loud felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Of what? She asked. Of failing. Of making the wrong choice. Of leading my people somewhere we cannot come back from. He looked at her. Of losing you. Or the child. Elena moved to sit beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. You won't lose us. You cannot promise that. No, but I can promise that whatever happens, we'll face it together. She took his hand. You're not alone in this, Tarek. You never have been. I know. But sometimes it feels like I am. His fingers tightened around hers. I am tired of running. I am tired of watching people die. I am tired of living like this, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the next disaster. Then let's stop. He frowned. What? Not stop running, but stop living like we're already dead. Elena turned to face him fully. We're still here, we're still alive, we have each other, and we have this baby coming, and we have people who care about us. That's not nothing. That's everything. It does not feel like everything when I'm trying to keep us all alive. I know, but you can't carry all of it by yourself. You have to let people help. You have to let me help. You are already helping, just by being here. Then let me do more. Let me take some of the weight. Let me be your partner, not just someone you have to protect. Tarek looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right. All right? I will try. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. Elena leaned against him, and they sat together in the firelight, not talking, just existing. And for a few stolen moments, the weight of the world didn't feel quite so heavy. Best. They moved 2 weeks later. The journey was every bit as brutal as Elena had feared. Her body ached constantly, her back screaming with every step, and the nausea that had mostly faded came roaring back with a vengeance. But she kept going. She didn't complain. She just put one foot in front of the other and trusted that they'd get where they were going. Kaya stayed close to her the whole time, steadying her when she stumbled, distracting her with chatter when the pain got too bad. Tarek hovered, of course, checking on her every few minutes until Elena wanted to scream at him to leave her alone. But she didn't. She knew he was scared, and she loved him for it, even when it drove her crazy. They reached the new camp after 4 days of hard travel. It was higher, colder, more isolated than the last place. But it was defensible, with clean water and enough game to survive. The tribe set to work rebuilding, and Elena helped where she could, though her body was already starting to slow her down. That night, she collapsed onto the mat in their new shelter and groaned. "I hate moving." Tarek sat down beside her and started rubbing her feet. "I know. And I hate being pregnant." "No, you do not." "Yes, I do. Everything hurts. I'm tired all the time, and I have to pee every 5 minutes." "That will get worse." Elena glared at him. "That's not helpful." "I am being honest." "Be less honest." Tarek smiled and kept rubbing her feet. Elena closed her eyes and let herself relax, the tension draining out of her muscles 1 inch at a time. After a while, she said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For taking care of me." "I will always take care of you." "I know." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "And I'll always take care of you." "I know." They stayed like that for a long time, quiet and content, and Elena thought about how far they'd come. From strangers bound by a desperate bargain to this, partners, lovers, parents-to-be. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was the life she'd chosen, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Summer arrived in full force, and with it came a fragile sense of stability. The soldiers didn't find them. The food supply held steady. The tribe began to relax, just a little, and life took on a rhythm that felt almost normal. Elena's belly grew round and unmistakable. She felt the baby move for the first time in early summer, a flutter so faint she thought she'd imagined it. But then it happened again, and she grabbed Tarek's hand and pressed it to her stomach. "Do you feel that?" He waited, his expression intent. Then his eyes widened. "Yes, that's our baby." Tarek's face broke into a smile so wide it made Elena's heart ache. "Our baby. Are you happy?" "Yes." He leaned down and kissed her stomach. "More than I can say." Elena ran her fingers through his hair and tried not to cry. She'd never seen him like this. Unguarded, joyful, completely present. It made her realize how much he'd been holding back, how much weight he'd been carrying alone. "I love you," she said. Tarek looked up at her. "I love you too." They stayed like that for a while, his hand on her belly, feeling their child move and kick and make its presence known. And Elena thought, for the first time since she'd learned she was pregnant, that maybe everything would be okay. Maybe they'd survive this. Maybe their child would grow up strong and safe. Maybe the soldiers would leave them alone, and they'd have years together instead of just days. Maybe. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The baby was born on a cold night in late autumn. Elena's labor started just after sunset, and by the time the sun rose again, she was exhausted, drenched in sweat, and holding a tiny, screaming infant in her arms. A girl. Elena stared down at her daughter, red-faced, furious, perfect, and felt something crack open inside her chest. This was real. This was hers. This tiny, fragile life that depended on her completely. "She is beautiful," Tarek said, his voice thick with emotion. Elena couldn't speak. She just nodded and held their daughter closer. The midwife, an older woman named Ista, who delivered half the babies in the tribe, cleaned the baby and wrapped her in soft hide. Then she placed her back in Elena's arms and said something in Apache that Elena didn't need translated. She was healthy, she was strong, she would live. Tarek reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand, and she immediately grabbed his finger. His breath caught. "She knows me." "Of course she does. You're her father." "I am her father." He said it like he was testing the words, like he couldn't quite believe them. Then he looked at Elena, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you." "For what?" "For her, for this, for everything." Elena leaned against him, too tired to do anything else, and let herself rest. The baby squirmed against her chest, making small, snuffling noises, and Elena thought about all the choices that had led her here. The bad ones, the desperate ones, the impossible ones, and the one good one, staying. "What should we name her?" Tarek asked. Elena thought about it. She wanted something strong, something that meant hope or survival or fight, something that captured everything this child represented. Asha, Tarek frowned. What does it mean? It's from a language I heard once. I think it means hope or life. I'm not sure, but it feels right. Asha. Tarek tested the name, rolling it around in his mouth. Then he nodded. Yes, it is perfect. Elena kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, Welcome to the world, Asha. We've been waiting for you. Done. The first few weeks were a blur of sleeplessness and feeding and learning how to keep a tiny human alive. Elena was exhausted, overwhelmed, and terrified she was doing everything wrong. But every time she looked at Asha, at her dark eyes, her small fists, the way she grabbed onto Elena's finger like it was the only thing tethering her to the world, she felt something fierce and protective rise up inside her. This was her daughter, and she would do anything to keep her safe. Tarek was surprisingly good with the baby. He held her with the same careful intensity he brought to everything else, and Asha seemed to sense it. She calmed when he spoke to her, stopped crying when he rocked her, slept soundly when he held her against his chest. You're a natural, Elena said one night, watching him pace the shelter with Asha in his arms. I do not feel like one. Neither do I, but we're doing it anyway. Tarek glanced at her. Are you happy? Yes. Elena didn't even have to think about it. Terrified, exhausted, but happy. Good. He smiled down at Asha. So am I. The tribe rallied around them. Kaya brought food and offered advice. The other women took turns holding the baby so Elena could rest. Even the old man who'd been so suspicious of her at first came by and left a small carved toy outside their shelter. Elena picked it up and turned it over in her hands, a tiny horse, smooth and perfect. She found the old man later and thanked him in his language, stumbling over the words but meaning them. He just nodded and walked away. But the gesture stayed with her, because it meant something. It meant she'd been accepted, truly accepted. Not as Tarek's wife, not as the white woman who'd wandered into their lives, but as one of them. As family. Winter came again, but this time it felt different. They had enough supplies, the shelter was warm, and every night Elena fell asleep with Tarek on one side and Asha on the other, both of them safe and alive, and hers. She thought about the woman she'd been, the one kneeling in the sand, certain she was going to die, the one who'd accepted Tarek's bargain because she had nothing left to lose, the one who'd been traded and discarded and treated like she didn't matter. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd survived the desert and the soldiers, and the winter and childbirth, someone who'd learned to speak a new language, live a new life, love a man she'd never expected to meet, someone who'd built a home in the most unlikely place and refused to give it up. Elena Cross had been broken once, but Elena, just Elena, no last name needed, was whole. And as she lay there in the darkness, listening to her daughter breathe and feeling Tarek's arm heavy across her waist, she realized something she'd never believed before. She was home, not because of where she was, but because of who she was with. And that was enough. Asha was 6 months old when the soldiers came back. Elena was mending clothes outside the shelter, the baby asleep in a sling against her chest, when she heard the shout. It was Dakota's voice, sharp and urgent, cutting through the normal afternoon noise of camp. She looked up and saw him sprinting toward the center, saw the warriors dropping what they were doing and reaching for weapons, saw the women gathering children with that practiced speed that came from too much experience. Her heart stopped. Then it started again, too fast, hammering against her ribs. Tarek emerged from a meeting with the elders and locked eyes with her across the camp. He didn't have to say anything. She could read it in his face. They were out of time. Elena stood, her hands automatically cradling Asha's head, and started toward him. But Kaya caught her arm first. Come, we need to move. What's happening? Soldiers, less than a mile out. Dakota saw them from the ridge. Kaya's face was pale but composed. We are leaving, now. Elena's mind raced. A mile. That meant maybe 20 minutes before they arrived, maybe less if they were moving fast. Where do we go? Higher. There is a place Tarek knows. Very hidden. Very difficult to reach. We go there and we wait. Kaya pulled her toward where the other women were already packing. Grab only what you need. Food, water, blankets for the baby. Nothing else. Elena moved on autopilot, shoving supplies into a pack while Asha stirred against her chest. The baby's eyes opened, dark and confused, and Elena murmured nonsense words to keep her calm. Around her, the camp was controlled chaos. People moving with speed and efficiency born from practice, dismantling shelters, scattering ashes, erasing every trace of their presence. Tarek found her as she was tying the pack closed. His hands came up to frame her face, and he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Listen to me. I'm listening. You stay with Kaya. You follow exactly where she goes. You do not stop. You do not look back. You understand? Yes? But what about you? I will be with the warriors. We are going to make sure they do not follow. His jaw was tight. We will catch up with you. Tarek, Elena. His voice was firm but not unkind. I need to know you and Asha are safe. I cannot do what I need to do if I am worried about you, please. Elena wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him she wouldn't leave without him, that he couldn't ask her to run while he stayed behind and fought. But she looked down at Asha, at her daughter's tiny face, and she knew she didn't have a choice. Okay, she whispered. Good. He kissed her hard, then bent and pressed his lips to Asha's forehead. I will find you, I promise. You better. He smiled, quick and fierce, and then he was gone, moving toward the other warriors, barking orders, becoming the leader they needed him to be. Elena watched him go and felt something twist in her chest, sharp and painful. Elena. Kaya's hand closed around her wrist. We go, now. They ran. The path was steep and treacherous, winding up through narrow passages between rocks that seemed designed to break ankles. Elena kept one hand on Asha and used the other to catch herself when she stumbled. Her pack banged against her back with every step, and her lungs burned, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Behind them, she heard shouting. Gunfire. Her blood turned to ice. Do not look, Kaya hissed. Keep moving. Elena obeyed. She climbed. She ran. She followed Kaya's lead through passages so narrow she had to turn sideways to squeeze through. Asha started crying, a thin, scared sound that cut through Elena like a blade, and Elena bounced her as best she could, whispering apologies and promises she wasn't sure she could keep. They climbed for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. By the time Kaya finally stopped, Elena's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. They were in a small depression hidden behind an outcropping of rock, barely visible from below. A dozen other women and children were already there, huddled together, silent. We wait here, Kaya whispered. The warriors will lead them away. Then we move again. Elena sank down onto a rock and tried to catch her breath. Asha was still crying, and Elena pulled her out of the sling to check her over. No injuries. Just scared. Elena held her close and rocked her, murmuring the same soothing nonsense she'd used earlier. The gunfire continued below, sharp cracks that echoed off the canyon walls. Elena flinched with every shot, her imagination conjuring horrible images of Tarek bleeding, dying, gone. She squeezed her eyes shut and forced herself to breathe. He promised. He said he'd find me. But she'd learned a long time ago that promises didn't mean much when bullets were flying. They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. One of the older women, Ista, the midwife, crept to the edge of the outcropping and looked down. She stayed there for a long time, perfectly still. Then she turned back and said something in Apache. Kaya translated, her voice tight. They are gone. The soldiers. They are heading east. And the warriors? She does not see them. Elena's heart sank. What does that mean? It means we wait longer. Kaya's hand found hers and squeezed. They will come. They always do. But the way she said it made Elena think she wasn't entirely sure. They waited until sunset. One by one, the warriors started trickling back, dusty, bloodied, exhausted. Elena counted them as they arrived, her heart in her throat. 8, 9, 10. Tarek wasn't among them. Neither was Dakota. Or 2 others. Elena stood up, Asha clutched to her chest and scanned every face. None of them looked at her. They just stood there, grim and silent, and Elena felt the world tilt under her feet. Where is he? Her voice came out too loud, too sharp. Where's Tarek? One of the warriors, A man named Chaitin, who'd always been kind to her, stepped forward. He stayed behind to draw them away. Is he alive? Chaitin hesitated. I do not know. What do you mean you don't know? Elena's voice cracked. You left him there? He ordered us to leave. He said to get everyone to safety and he would follow. Chaitin's face was hard. We did as he commanded. So you just left him? Elena couldn't breathe. You left him in Dakota and we had no choice, Chaitin interrupted. His voice was rough with emotion. He made us swear. He said if we did not go, he would never forgive us. So we went. Elena stared at him. Then she turned and walked away, because if she stayed, she was going to scream or cry or fall apart completely. She made it about 20 feet before her legs gave out. She sank down onto the ground, clutching Asha, and tried to hold herself together. Kaya found her a few minutes later. She didn't say anything. She just sat down beside Elena and put an arm around her shoulders. He promised, Elena whispered. He promised he'd come back. I know. What if he doesn't? Then we survive anyway. Because that is what he would want. Elena closed her eyes and pressed her face into Asha's hair. The baby had finally stopped crying, worn out from fear and exhaustion. She was so small, so fragile, and Elena had no idea how she was supposed to protect her if Tarek was gone. But she would, because she'd promised, and because she didn't know how to do anything else. They stayed in the hidden camp for 3 days. No one spoke much. Everyone just waited, tense and watchful, hoping for news that didn't come. Elena barely slept. She kept Asha close, fed her when she cried, changed her when she needed it, and spent the rest of the time staring at the path the warriors had taken, willing Tarek to appear. He didn't. On the morning of the 4th day, Chaitin approached her. We need to move. No. Elena, I said no. She didn't look at him. We wait. We cannot wait forever. The soldiers could come back. We need to get farther north. Then go. I'm staying. You cannot stay here alone with a baby. Watch me. Chaitin crouched down beside her, his voice gentle. He would not want this. You don't know what he would want. I do. He would want you and Asha safe. He would want you to keep going. He would want... Stop. Elena's voice broke. Just stop. Chaitin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I will give you 1 more day, but after that we move. With or without you. He walked away, and Elena sat there, shaking, trying to hold herself together. Kaya appeared with food, and Elena forced herself to eat because she needed her strength for Asha. But every bite tasted like ash. That night, she lay awake with Asha asleep against her chest and stared up at the stars. She thought about the first time she'd seen Tarek, standing over her in the sand, offering her an impossible choice. She thought about the way he'd looked at her when she'd agreed to stay, like he couldn't quite believe it. She thought about his hands on her skin, his voice in her ear, the way he'd smiled when Asha was born. And she thought about what it would mean if he never came back. She couldn't do it. She couldn't imagine a world where he didn't exist, where she woke up every morning and he wasn't there, where Asha grew up without knowing her father. But she also knew she didn't have a choice. If he was gone, if he was dead, she would have to keep going. For Asha. For herself. For the life they'd built together. Even if it killed her. Elena pressed her face into Asha's hair and let herself cry, quiet and desperate, until there were no tears left. Tarek appeared just after dawn on the 5th day. Elena was feeding Asha when she heard the shout. She looked up and saw Chaitin running toward the edge of camp, saw the other warriors following, saw people starting to gather. Her heart stopped. Then she was on her feet, running, Asha bouncing against her chest. She pushed through the crowd and saw him. Tarek stood at the edge of the clearing, leaning heavily on Dakota, his face gray with exhaustion. There was blood on his shirt, dried and dark, and a crude bandage wrapped around his left arm. But he was alive. Elena didn't remember moving. 1 second she was standing with the crowd, and the next she was in front of him, her free hand clutching his shirt, her voice shaking. You bastard! Tarek looked down at her. I know. You promised. I know. I thought you were dead. I am not dead. His hand came up to cup her face. I am here. Elena wanted to hit him. She wanted to scream at him for scaring her, for leaving her, for making her wait 5 days not knowing if he was alive or dead. But she couldn't. She just stood there, shaking, while he looked at her with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "You should be. I had to. They would have followed us. I had to lead them away." "And Dakota?" "I am here," Dakota said from behind Tarek. He looked even worse, limping, a gash across his forehead, one arm hanging useless at his side. But he was grinning. "We are both very hard to kill." Elena looked between them, and something inside her broke. She started crying, huge ugly sobs that she couldn't control, and Tarek pulled her against him with his good arm. Asha squirmed between them, confused and fussy, and Tarek bent his head to kiss her. "I'm sorry," he murmured again. "I am so sorry." Elena couldn't answer. She just held on to him and cried until there was nothing left. The healers took Tarek and Dakota immediately. Elena hovered while Ista worked, cleaning wounds and stitching cuts and applying poultices that smelled terrible but apparently worked. Tarek's arm was the worst. A bullet graze that had bled more than it should have, but the rest was mostly bruises and exhaustion. "You will live," Ista said bluntly when she was done. "But you are stupid." Tarek almost smiled. "I know. Do not do it again." "I will try." Ista snorted and moved on to Dakota, leaving Elena alone with Tarek. She sat down beside him and took his good hand, holding it so tightly her knuckles went white. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. "You did not." "But I could have." "Yes." He didn't try to soften it. "You could have, and I am sorry for that. Don't do it again." "I cannot promise that." Elena's throat tightened. "Why not?" "Because if the same situation happens again, I will make the same choice. I will always choose to protect you and Asha, even if it costs me my life." He looked at her. "Can you accept that?" Elena wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him it was selfish, that he didn't get to make that choice alone, that she needed him alive more than she needed him heroic. But she also knew he was right. He was a leader, he had responsibilities, and he would die before he let anyone else pay for his choices. "I hate it," she said finally. "I know. But I understand." "Thank you." He squeezed her hand. "Now tell me, how is our daughter?" Elena glanced down at Asha, who was asleep in her sling. "She's fine. Scared, but fine." "Good." Tarek reached out with his bandaged arm, wincing, and touched Asha's head. "I am sorry I left you." "You came back. That's what matters." "Yes." His eyes were heavy. "I did." Elena watched him drift toward sleep, his hand still holding hers, and felt something settle in her chest. He was alive. They were together. And somehow, against all odds, they'd survived again. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't safe, but it was enough. Recovery took weeks. Tarek's arm healed slowly, and he was frustrated by his inability to do everything he'd done before. Elena caught him trying to chop wood one-handed and physically remove the axe from his grip. "You're going to hurt yourself." "I am fine." "You're not fine. You're injured. Let someone else do it." "I do not need someone else to do it." Elena crossed her arms. "Yes, you do, and you're going to let them. Because if you tear those stitches, and I have to watch Ista sew you back together again, I will lose my mind." Tarek looked like he wanted to argue, but then he sighed and set the axe down. "Fine. Thank you. You are bossy. I learned from the best." He almost smiled. Then he pulled her close with his good arm and kissed the top of her head. "I'm glad you are bossy." "You weren't saying that 5 minutes ago. I changed my mind." Elena leaned into him and breathed in the familiar smell of him, smoke and leather and something indefinably Tarek. She'd come so close to losing this, too close, and the thought of it still made her chest tight with fear. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Don't leave me again." "I will try not to." It wasn't a promise, but it was as close as he could get, and Elena took it, holding it close, and tried to believe it would be enough. Life settled back into routine over the following months. The soldiers didn't come back. The tribe remained hidden in the high camp, and slowly, the tension began to ease. People laughed again. Children played. The warriors stopped sleeping with weapons in their hands. Asha grew. She started sitting up on her own, then crawling, then pulling herself upright on anything she could reach. She had Tarek's dark eyes and Elena's stubborn determination, and she was already showing signs of having inherited both their tempers. "She is going to be trouble," Kaya said one afternoon, watching Asha try to eat a rock. Elena plucked the rock out of her daughter's hand and replaced it with a piece of dried fruit. "I know. You were trouble too." "I was not." "You were. You showed up here not knowing anything, barely speaking our language, and somehow convinced everyone you belonged." Kaya grinned. "That takes a special kind of stubborn." Elena laughed. "I guess it does. Asha will be the same, but stronger, because she has both of you." Kaya's expression softened. "She is lucky." "I hope so." "She is, and so are you." Elena looked over at Tarek, who was sitting with some of the other men, his arm mostly healed now, his laugh carrying across the camp. He caught her looking and smiled, and Elena felt that familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I am." That. The real shift came a year later. Asha was walking by then, toddling around camp and getting into everything. Elena was pregnant again. Not far along, just enough to be sure, and Tarek was insufferable about it. He'd learned nothing from the first time. If anything, he was worse. "I'm not carrying that," he said when Elena reached for a water jug. "It's a jug, not a boulder." "You are pregnant." "Barely." "That does not matter." Elena wanted to argue, but she was too tired. So she let him carry the water and the firewood and basically everything else, and tried not to murder him for being overprotective. But the real change came when a group of travelers arrived at the camp. They were Apache, from a different band, and they brought news. The soldiers were pulling back. There'd been a change in policy, something about reassigning troops to deal with conflicts elsewhere. It didn't mean they were safe, not permanently, but it meant they had breathing room. For the first time in years, the tribe didn't have to run. The decision was made to move back to lower ground, to a place with better hunting and more reliable water. It would still be remote, still defensible, but it wouldn't be the harsh, isolated camp they'd been living in. Elena helped pack, Asha strapped to her back, and thought about how strange it was. A year ago, she'd been terrified they'd all die. Now they were planning for a future that extended beyond next week. "Are you happy?" Tarek asked her the night before they left. "Yes. Even though we are moving again?" "I don't mind moving if it means we're safe." Elena leaned against him. "Besides, moving means we're still alive." "That is true." His hand rested on her stomach, still flat but not for long. "And we are still growing." "We are." "I am glad." "So am I." Elena tilted her head to look at him. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd walked away that first day?" "Yes." "And?" "I think I would have survived, but I would not have lived." He met her eyes. "You gave me that. A life. Not just survival." Elena's throat tightened. "You gave me the same thing. Then we are even." "I don't think that's how it works." "Then how does it work?" "I don't know, but I think it's more than even. I think it's—" She searched for the right word. "Partnership. Equals. Two people choosing each other every day." Tarek considered that. "I like that." "Good. Because you're stuck with me now." "I am not stuck. I am exactly where I want to be." Elena kissed him, and Asha, who'd been sleeping between them, woke up and started fussing. They both laughed, and Elena scooped her up and settled her down again, and Tarek wrapped an arm around both of them. And Elena thought, this is it. This is what I was looking for all along. Not safety, not security. Just this. People who love me and need me and choose me over and over again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that made all the difference. The new camp was everything the old one wasn't. Warmer, greener, full of life. They built shelters that felt more permanent, planted crops that would actually grow, and started planning for seasons instead of just days. Elena's second pregnancy was easier than the first. Maybe because she knew what to expect. Maybe because she wasn't terrified anymore. She worked through most of it, slowing down only in the final weeks. And when the baby came, another girl, smaller than Asha but just as fierce, it felt like confirmation of something she'd always known. They were going to be okay. They named her Nara, which meant thunder in the language Elena was finally starting to speak fluently. Tarek held her with the same careful reverence he'd shown Asha, and Elena watched him with both their daughters and felt her heart swell to the point of breaking. "Two girls," he said, sounding awed. "Is that a problem?" "No, it is perfect." He looked up at her. "They will be strong, like their mother, and stubborn, like their father." That too. Asha, now 2 years old and deeply suspicious of her new sister, poked Nara's tiny foot. "Baby?" "Yes, love. Your sister." Asha frowned, clearly unimpressed. Then she climbed into Elena's lap and glared at Nara like she'd personally offended her. Elena laughed and kissed the top of her head. "You'll like her eventually." Asha didn't look convinced. The years passed, not easily, but steadily. There were hard winters and dry summers. There were illnesses and injuries and losses that hit hard. But there were also births and marriages and celebrations. The tribe grew. Children who'd been toddlers became hunters. Elders passed and were mourned, and new leaders stepped up to take their place. Tarek remained one of them, respected, trusted, steady. But he was no longer alone in carrying the weight. He'd learned to delegate, to trust others, to let Elena shoulder some of the burden. It made him lighter, happier. Elena became fluent in the language, fluent in the customs, fluent in the life she'd chosen. She taught her daughters to work and to fight and to think for themselves. She told them stories about where she'd come from, about the woman who'd been traded twice and survived both times, about the choice she'd made to stay. "Why did you stay?" Asha asked one night. She was 7 by then, old enough to understand some things but not others. Elena thought about it. "Because I realized I could. Because for the first time in my life, someone gave me a real choice. And I chose the thing that scared me most." "Why would you choose something scary?" "Because sometimes the scary thing is also the right thing." Elena brushed hair out of Asha's face. "And because your father was worth it." Asha wrinkled her nose. "He's not that great." "He is to me." "You're weird," Elena laughed. "Maybe, but I'm happy." And she was. Not in the way she'd imagined happiness when she was 19 and naive, not the fairy tale kind with a white dress and a house and a life that looked like everyone else's, but a different kind. The kind that came from surviving impossible things and coming out the other side stronger. The kind that came from choosing someone every single day and having them choose you back. The kind that came from building a life with your bare hands and refusing to let go of it. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that made it worth everything. Elena was 32 when she finally saw another white person. They'd moved camp again, following the game, and ended up closer to a settlement than they'd been in years. Tarek was cautious about it, but the hunting was good and the land was defensible, so they stayed. One afternoon, Elena was gathering plants near the edge of their territory when she heard voices. English voices. She froze, her heart hammering, and then crept closer to see. 3 women. Settlers, from the look of them, with sun-worn faces and tired eyes. They were filling canteens at a stream and talking in low voices. Elena watched them from the shadows and felt something strange twist in her chest. She'd been part of the tribe for so long that she'd almost forgotten she used to be one of them. A white woman, a settler, someone who belonged to that world instead of this one. But looking at them now, she felt nothing. No kinship, no longing. Just a distant curiosity, like she was watching people from a story she'd heard once but never lived. One of the women laughed at something, and the sound was so familiar, sharp and bitter and exhausted, that Elena almost stepped forward. But then she caught herself. She didn't belong there anymore. She belonged here, with Tarek and Asha and Nara and the tribe that had taken her in and made her one of their own. She turned and walked away without looking back. When she got back to camp, Tarek was waiting for her. "You were gone a long time." "I saw some settlers." His expression sharpened. "Did they see you?" "No." "Good." He studied her face. "Are you all right?" Elena thought about it. "Yes, I think I am." "You do not miss it? That life?" "No." She said it with absolute certainty. "I don't miss it at all." Tarek pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Good, because I would not let you go anyway. Elena laughed. Possessive. Always. She leaned into him and breathed in the smell of smoke and leather and home. And she thought about how far she'd come, from a girl who'd been traded like livestock to a woman who'd chosen her own path, from someone who'd believed she was worthless to someone who knew her own value. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it, every single day. Whopa! 10 years later, Elena stood at the edge of a cliff and looked out over the canyon. Below her, the tribe was setting up camp, children running, fires being lit, the familiar rhythm of life continuing like it always did. Asha was 17 now, tall and fierce, and so much like Tarek, it was almost eerie. Nara was 15, quieter but no less determined. They both spoke the language better than Elena did, moved through the world with a confidence Elena had never had at their age. They were strong, they were loved, they knew who they were and where they came from. And that was everything Elena had ever wanted for them. Tarek came up beside her and slipped an arm around her waist. What are you thinking about? How much has changed? And how grateful I am for all of it. Elena leaned against him. Even the hard parts. The hard parts made us who we are. I know. She looked up at him. Do you ever regret it? Bringing me here? Never. He said it without hesitation. You're the best choice I ever made. Even though I was a disaster at first, especially because you were a disaster, you proved me right. Elena laughed. About what? That you were strong enough to survive. He kissed her temple. And strong enough to thrive. Elena closed her eyes and let herself feel it, the warmth of the sun, the solid weight of Tarek beside her, the sound of her daughter's voices drifting up from below. This was her life, the one she'd chosen, the one she'd fought for, and it was beautiful, not in spite of the hardship, but because of it. Because she'd earned every single moment of peace, every laugh, every quiet night by the fire. Because she'd refused to give up when giving up would have been easier. Because she'd chosen love over fear, belonging over safety, partnership over survival. She'd been traded twice in her life. But the second time, she'd traded herself, given up the woman she'd been in exchange for the woman she wanted to become. And she'd never looked back. Tarek squeezed her waist. Come, they are waiting for us. Elena nodded and let him lead her down the path toward camp, toward their daughters, toward the life they'd built together. And as she walked, she thought about the girl who'd knelt in the sand, terrified and alone, and wished she could go back and tell her one thing. You're going to be okay. More than okay. You're going to find a home. You're going to find love. You're going to find yourself. And it's going to be worth every single second. Elena smiled and quickened her pace, and by the time they reached camp, she was laughing. Because she was home. And nothing, not soldiers, not hardship, not fear, could take that away from her. She'd chosen it, she'd earned it, and she was keeping it for the rest of her life.